Brenda Finds a Home. Number 1 Railway Cuttings was a comfortable home for Brenda, a badger who lived on the edge of town. It was handy for food and shelter living on the disused railway line which threaded through the city. Then one day, Brenda's happy world was shattered. The angry snarl of a bulldozer broke the silence as it crashed into the cutting and started to fill it in. And as the builders moved in, Brenda decided it was time for her to move out. She packed her bags and took a long last look at the bright lights of the town and set off on her quest to find a new home. It wasn't long before Brenda came across a place which looked a bit like her old home in railway cuttings. But it wasn't. It was filled with cars and lorries, hooting and speeding past and filling the air with choking exhaust fumes. Brenda quickly decided that the motorway was madness and no place for her. Early next morning, Brenda passed a strange stone which stood by the roadside. It said National Park, and Brenda remembered what she had learned at school about national parks. They were supposed to be beautiful places where the countryside was protected against nasty things happening. Brenda liked the sound of that. It wasn't long before Brenda entered a dark, silent forest of fir trees. There didn't seem to be any sign of life. No bird song, flowers, or insects. And Brenda felt uncomfortable there. But she was very tired after her long journey, so she lay down by some cut timber and very soon she was sleeping like a log. That night, she was woken by the sound of men shouting, dogs barking, and the flashing of torches in the darkness. Hiding behind a pile of logs, Brenda watched horrified as the men sent their dogs down an old badger's set, which she hadn't noticed before. So this was for the sport of badger baiting, but this was one badger who wasn't going to play. Traveling on, Brenda saw some shining towers on the horizon, which looked like the office blocks she had left behind in the town. They turned out to be the buildings of a modern farm. There were no flowers in the fields, barbed wire fences, no trees, and the streams were polluted by chemicals. It was no place for a badger. Brenda started to climb up a steep hill. The air became colder and cleaner, and huge blackened rocks appeared in the distance. She met a mad hare, who offered her some bilberries and described the different kinds of birds and animals found on the moors. But the wind was cold, and Brenda decided she needed a bit more shelter in her new home. Back in the valley, the rocks changed color again to a grey white. The grass was sweet and green, and little copses of trees appeared. This is more like it, thought Brenda. Then she came across a huge hole in the ground. She was wondering what kind of animal could have dug a hole like that when suddenly, boom! Brenda was thrown into the air by an unseen hand and covered with flying rocks and dust by an enormous explosion. She had wandered into an enormous, ugly, limestone quarry. She picked herself up and beat a hasty retreat. By this time, Brenda was beginning to wonder if she would ever find a new home. Tired and fed up, she wandered into an old barn for a rest. She shared the hayloft with some friendly owls and bats. As she watched the moon rising through the tiny window, Brenda began to feel very homesick for railway cuttings. Next day, Brenda was amazed to find the little stone-built village outside the barn filled with cars and people dressed up in brightly colored clothes. It was carnival time, but it was just too crowded for Brenda, so she headed for the wide open spaces again. Beyond the village was a lovely old farmyard, where Brenda met a sheepdog with a kindly face who listened patiently to her story. He seemed to understand and suggested that she might like to try the ancient wood on the hillside above the farm. It was called Brockhole Wood, because once upon a time badgers had lived there. At last, Branda was beginning to feel at home. The wood was full of nice old fashioned oaks and birches, rich in insects and carpeted in flowers. The path led to a grassy glade filled with bluebells, and she could tell it would be rich in her favorite food, fat, juicy earthworms. By a flower clad bank, Branda finally found the ideal set, which had been built by the badgers after whom the wood had been named. It had everything a badger could wish for, and it was in a place where people seemed to care about the countryside and all the creatures who lived in it. At long last, Branda had found her new home. The end. If you like my video, don't forget to like and subscribe.